Okay, now we're going to shift gears here a little bit. I'm going to try to give you a quick overview of Custer's life up through the Civil War, and then we will continue on with his post-Civil War career after that. George Armstrong Custer was born in 1839, December 5th, 1839, in New Rumley, Harrison County, Ohio. He was the eldest of 5 children. He was born to his father, Emmanuel Custer, and his mother, Maria Ward Kirkpatrick. The other Custer children that would follow George Armstrong Custer as the eldest would be Nevin Johnson Custer, born in 1842, Thomas Ward Custer, born in 1845, Boston Custer was born in 1848, and in 1852, the final Custer child, the only female, Margaret Emma, or Maggie Custer, was born. And all of the Custer family members will be entwined in the eldest brother, and obviously several were at the Battle of the Little Bighorn and several died. So the entire family is just wrapped in the mystery and the tragedy of the Little Bighorn. Custer is a farm boy growing up in Ohio, graduates from school at the age of 16, and then applies and gets a teaching certificate and begins his teaching career, but it was short-lived. He only taught, I believe, 6 months and decided that it wasn't for him, and at that point he petitioned his state representative, John A. Bingham, a Republican from the House of Representatives, about getting or securing an appointment to West Point, the military academy, which was a federally funded institution. John Bingham stated he was impressed with Custer's letter, even though Custer was a registered Democrat, while Bingham was a Republican. And Custer ended up getting into West Point and started his career as a cadet in 1857 as a 17-year-old farm boy. He's supposed to graduate 5 years later in 1862, but the Civil War begins in April 1861, and what ends up happening is the class of 1861, which is supposed to graduate at the end of June 1861, actually graduates 6 weeks early because of the Civil War starting. So the class of 1861 graduates early. Now the class of 1862, which Custer is a member of, is able or allowed to graduate 6 weeks later at the end of June of 1861. So they all graduated a year early because of the war. Custer ends up last in his class at West Point and is assigned to a cavalry position. He ends up making it to the battlefield in July 21st, 1861, and he fights in the first major battle of the Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run. The Union loses the battle, but Custer comes out well in the battle and actually leads an orderly retreat of his men back to Washington. So he realized that this kind of life suited him, even though they had been defeated. In the coming months of the war, as we're getting into 1862, Custer attempts to bring himself to the attention of his superiors so they will recognize in Custer what he already recognizes in himself. And the way Custer did this was he volunteered for dangerous or risky missions and performed courageous acts. One thing Custer did was he captured the first enemy battle flag for the Army of the Potomac, and that raised some eyebrows. He also was one of the officers that ascended in a hot air balloon several times on the Peninsula Campaign in 1862 to view the Confederate troop movements from over the trees. Even though they were shooting at him, he stayed up there. So that raised some eyebrows. Finally, Custer, while wading across the Chickahominy River in Virginia, he actually spied the enemy position and brought back vital intelligence to his superiors. So all these acts finally brought Custer to the attention of Major General George B. McClellan, who was the commander of the Union Army. And McClellan took Custer and made him a member of his headquarters staff. So Custer was moved up in rank from the second lieutenant, which is what he started at in the Civil War, and he moved him up to a captain and made him aide-de-camp, which was sort of like a courier role. Being on McClellan's staff allowed Custer to see the war from the inside, and he loved it. And he remained on McClellan's staff until late 1862, when finally After the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, President Lincoln, relieved McClellan of his command because he did not like the way the Major General was performing in the field and thought he was too slow and too timid. Custer, as a member of the staff, had no choice but to go home and wait for reassignment. And he did so. Home, in the meantime, had changed while Custer was away, while he was at West Point and while he's starting the Civil War. The family had moved from New Rumley, Ohio to Monroe, Michigan, which was south of, or is south of present-day Detroit, Michigan. So Custer went home to Monroe, Michigan, and there, while on leave, or while waiting reassignment, he is introduced to Libby Bacon, who is a prominent Republican's daughter, Daniel Bacon's daughter, and he becomes entranced with her immediately and begins to immediately attempt to court her. He doesn't get very far before he's called back to the war in 1863. At this point, Custer and several young officers are recruited by the new commander, cavalry commander in the Army of the Potomac. That would be General Alfred Pleasonton. Now, Pleasonton has handpicked several of these officers because he realized that he would need these young officers that had this sort of fire and audacity and tenaciousness that would be needed to defeat the Southerners. And Custer was one of these members of this group. Pleasonton begins to groom these younger officers for general's billets and for higher ranking officers. In 1863, in the spring, the Union cavalry is transformed from basically a group of couriers and messengers and things like that to a superior fighting unit under the command of people like Buford and Merritt and Torbert and Custer, people like that. In Virginia, they fight several battles. Main ones would be at the Battle of Brandy Station, and another one would be at Aldie in Virginia. And it is at that point that Custer has brought himself to the attention of enough people where he is given a chance to be moved up in rank. And of course, Pleasonton endorses this young officer, and it is approved by Congress. So at the end of May 1863, or at the end of June, 1863, you have Custer going from captain up to brevet brigadier general. So now he has 1 star in his collar. Custer now goes from leading, a small group of men to leading an entire brigade. And his first chance of actually fighting with the new brigade is at the Battle of Gettysburg on July 3rd, 1863. At that battle, Custer, on the 3rd day of the battle, his force, the regiment right here, or the brigade right here, the Michigan Brigade, that's who he is leading that day. That is what that is, that painting there. Custer defeats Jeb Stuart on that day, keeps Stuart from attacking the Union infantry rear, and thus the Union wins the Battle of Gettysburg. So at the Battle of Gettysburg, Custer and the Union cavalry come of age. They have whipped the Southerners in a significant battle for the very first time, and the whole Southern Army has been defeated, very major defeat, and basically saves the Union Army that day.